Hi Kim, my question is about conflict resolution. I've been with my partner for 7 years, and anytime we get into a fight or argument, he completely shuts down. It's becoming mentally draining for me since I'm anxiously attached.
My boyfriend and I have been dating for about a year. I communicated to him that I wanted to be married soon, but this has been a source of arguments for us for the past few months.
I was wondering if you would speak a little bit on having a martyr complex.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Engineering Love. I'm your host, Kim Pullender, and I help you engineer stronger relationships by troubleshooting conflict and communication. Today, we're going to be spending a little bit of time talking about attachment theory. I've made some videos on attachment theory, and I have a feeling most of you are familiar to some degree with attachment theory. Basically, attachment style attempts to explain why some people are aloof in relationships while others need frequent validation. A common combination for people are anxious avoidant, and one of the questions today actually deals with that dynamic where one person is anxiously attached and the other person is avoidant. So why are some people always chasing after their partner, and why are some people avoiding their partner? Chances are this is tied to your attachment style. It's basically how you became attached to people when you were younger. Attachment theory was originally developed by Mary Ainsworth and John Bowlby, who determined that your attachment style would have been developed between you and your parent or your caregiver. Basically the person who took care of you. This could even be a grandparent. And based on how your caregiver met your needs growing up, this would have determined what you think of people and the world we live in. Attachment style has a huge impact on you because it affects how open-minded you are to making friends, how you behave in friendships, how you are in romantic relationships. And there are 4 main attachment styles from childhood. They get labeled as different names going from childhood to adulthood, but the 4 from childhood are secure, anxious ambivalent, anxious avoidant, and fearful avoidant. So to explain these styles, I like to use the example of a mother leaving for the grocery store. Imagine a mother who needs to go run an errand, let's say the grocery store, and leave their child with another caregiver. Now, in all 4 attachment styles, the children are obviously going to be affected when the primary caregiver leaves. In that way, all 4 attachment styles will react similarly initially. But it's how the children respond when the mother comes back that sheds light on what attachment style is developing. Let's take the first one, secure attachment. When the mother returns from the grocery store, the child is happy to see their mom and approaches her for nurturing and comfort. In anxious ambivalent or anxious attachment, the child is confused, a little bit agitated, avoids eye contact when the mom comes back. But anxious attachment children also cling to the mother desperately when she returns. And they do this because the mother's affection is unpredictable. Some days the mom is warm and attentive and nurturing, and other days she's cold and distant. Thus, over time, the child sees the mother as unpredictable. In the third style, or anxious avoidant, the child notices that the mom returned, but doesn't necessarily run to her for comfort. Avoidant children learn that depending on their caregiver for comfort is pointless. They learn to suppress their emotional expression because communicating their needs will just lead to criticism and rejection. By suppressing their feelings, they're actually able to remain closer to their mother because the mother won't pull away from them. And finally, for the 4th style, fearful avoidant, the child is internally conflicted when the mom returns. They may run to her initially when the mom initially gets back from the grocery store, but then pull back for fear of the mom's response. Fearful avoidant children typically grow up in an environment of abuse and trauma, so they'll run to the mom because they desire nurturing, but then pull back when they get close to the mom, and while avoiding the mom, they may scream and be inconsolable. Fearful avoidant children also do not feel safe around others. So how does this translate to how adults act with a particular attachment style? If we take secure attachment, securely attached adults are sociable. They're warm, they're easy to connect with and talk to. They have awareness of their feelings and feel comfortable expressing them. They're usually surrounded with long-term friendships, relationships of depth, not afraid of commitment. People with secure attachment are also generally liked by their coworkers, their bosses, subordinates. Now, adults with anxious attachment style are people who are tuned into other people's needs, perhaps people pleasers, but they're often very insecure and anxious about their worth in a relationship, their worth to others, their value to others. If they experience some rejection or abandonment in a relationship, they will for sure blame themselves and think of themselves as being faulty or broken or not being worthy of love. People with anxious attachment style generally need a lot of reassurance, maybe constant reassurance that they are loved, valued, that the person wants to be in a relationship with them, wants to be in the friendship with them. And this kind of underlying fear of abandonment might cause anxious adults. And the strong fear of abandonment might cause people with anxious attachment style to be prone to jealousy or suspicion of their partners. Sometimes they're labeled as needy or clingy. And people with anxious attachment style definitely do not like being alone for long periods of time. The third style of avoidant attachment in adults may look like confidence. These people are seen as independent a lot. They generally don't seek emotional intimacy and have challenges maintaining long-term healthy relationships. Coworkers might view them as loners or aloof. They have commitment issues or challenges and issues in any dynamic friendship, romantic, that involves emotional intimacy. Avoidant people are quick to feel smothered or suffocated in relationships, and they always have an exit strategy. Never become too close. And the final style is disorganized attachment style, or fearful avoidant. Out of the 4 attachment styles, disorganized is the most challenging one to navigate because these people have had a very rough life. Perhaps a lot of childhood abuse, a lot of trauma where they've been emotionally, mentally, physically, or even sexually abused. And a disorganized attachment style develops when the caregiver is the source of the child's fears. Because the caregiver is supposed to be the source of love, protection, security, but throughout trauma, the opposite thing happens. So if the primary caregiver is not physically or emotionally bonded or available to the child, then the child is unable to form a bond with their parent. And this insecurity that gets seeded with disorganized attachment doesn't just go away once you become an adult. It will continue to affect how you form attachments with other adults, how you form bonds with people, how you connect to people, basically how you become attached to people or not. Adults with disorganized attachment are not consistent in how they interact with others. They're kind of unpredictable. They might do a hot and cold thing where one minute they're all into you and the next minute they're cold and detached, or a push and pull thing where they're pushing for your time and attention, and the next minute they're just pulling away from you. They might want to be in a committed, loving relationship, but have crippling fears about being rejected or abandoned. Socially, they also might struggle by oversharing past trauma when the time may not be appropriate. For instance, they're sharing all of the trauma and deep secrets from their past on the first date, or sharing it with people who don't have the capacity or ability to hold space for them. And then it just perpetuates this experience of being abandoned or uncared for. A lot of times they're just not picking up on social cues or boundaries of knowing when to share and when to hold back. When people come to me for counseling, a lot of times they'll come into the session very confidently saying, yeah, I'm securely attached, but my partner is the one who's avoidant, or my partner's the one who's anxiously attached. And I tend to question people who are quick to label themselves as securely attached. Oftentimes, they are the ones who turn out to be exactly what they're accusing their partner of, meaning they are the ones who end up being more anxiously attached than securely attached. Or they are avoidant, and they perceive their confidence and aloofness and independence as secure attachment versus being avoidantly attached. These labels are interesting, and everybody loves taking attachment style tests and that sort of thing, but I really encourage you ultimately to move past the label. It's nice to know what your starting point is, such as, okay, I'm anxiously attached, now what? Because the path to becoming securely attached or remaining securely attached is going to be the same for all 4 styles. And that is learning to tune into your needs recognize your needs, express those needs, be willing to be vulnerable, understand when to share, with whom, creating a good support network, having the appropriate amount of accountability versus all of the accountability when things fall apart, not diving into self-blame and self-loathing. And this is just to name a few of dynamics that play out in a healthy relationship. So let's get into the first question, which deals with a common dynamic, and that is anxious attachment paired with avoidant attachment. People always wonder, why do anxious and avoidant always find each other? And they're perplexed. And to me, it makes perfect sense why anxious and avoidant would find each other. If you take an anxious person who believes that they are not worthy of attachment, not worthy of love, that people just basically can barely put up with them, that they're to blame for everything that goes wrong. Well, you take that person out in the world, who are they going to be a perfect match for? Who are they actually going to seek in that whole law of attraction? They're going to end up with someone who is aloof, someone who gives them the experience of feeling unworthy of love. And now enter the avoidant attachment person. Someone who shuts down when things get tough. Someone who gives the silent treatment. Someone who breaks up when the minute things get rough. Someone who blames the other person instead of taking personal accountability. This is how naturally, very naturally, anxious and avoidant types find each other over and over again. And why would an avoidant person who has commitment issues be attracted to an anxiously attached person? Because they wouldn't fare so well with someone who had a strong sense of self and would call them out on their avoidant behaviors. It's easier for them to sit back and have someone constantly clamoring after them, someone who they can blame instead of looking inward. So let's move on to the first question today that deals with anxious and avoidant people in a relationship and see how this plays out for them.
Hi Kim, my question is about conflict resolution. I've been with my partner for 7 years, and anytime we get into a fight or argument, he completely shuts down. He doesn't talk to me for days on end and sometimes sleeps in the guest bedroom. I always initiate contact and we typically talk it out. I'm starting to get tired of always chasing him to talk to me. How can I ensure this behavior stops? I've tried to set up a system where if he needs the space, we can break for a couple of hours. But whoever needs the break should come back and talk when they're ready. We did this for a while, but now we're back to ignoring each other. It's been about a week since we last talked, and I don't want to initiate contact because I don't want this to be the case every time he needs space. It's becoming mentally draining for me since I'm anxiously attached. He knows this, and yet still does it.
Thank you very much for submitting this question. You highlight the dynamic of an anxiously attached person and an avoidantly attached person perfectly. I cannot tell you how many couples come to me who have the anxious avoidant dynamic. So where do we even begin with this? Well, let's start at the silent treatment that is playing out between you two. Now, I made a few videos on communication, and one of them happens to talk about stonewalling. Stonewalling is a topic that the Gottmans, Dr. John and Julie Gottman, have talked about extensively in their work, and they call out stonewalling specifically as different from the silent treatment, in that stonewalling is when a person feels flooded emotionally, that fight or flight response has kicked off. They become overwhelmed. In becoming overwhelmed and being physically overwhelmed with adrenaline and everything else that comes with fight or flight, they shut down and they withdraw. And the Gottmans were quick to say that when someone is stonewalling, it's okay to give them time, to ask for a break, for the stonewaller to ask for a break and for the partner to allow them to have the break. However, the Gottmans stress that it's important that these breaks don't last more than 24 hours. If they last more than 24 hours, now we're getting into the realm of the silent treatment. When it comes to a physical response of adrenaline and the nervous system and the physical body being overwhelmed, the body will recover in 24 hours. If you wait longer than 24 hours, then you start to perpetuate this willful silence, this willful act of not communicating and shutting down. And the caller mentioned something that I wholeheartedly agree with about the person who asks for the break is the one who should initiate talking again. And I do agree, because with anxious avoidant attachment types, breaks are going to be common and recommended, but it helps the anxious person to feel less abandoned if the person asking for a break says to them, hey, I just need a break right now. Can we put this on pause? Let's set a time to check back in. In fact, let's check back in an hour. Can you just give me an hour? And then following that, the person who asks for the break should be the one who checks in an hour, should be the one who brings up the conversation again. If it goes into the night and you're not talking, in the morning, the person who took the break, person pulling away, should be the one to initiate again. It's the mature thing to do. Because even if it's a 5-minute break or a 24-hour break or a 2-week break, that anxiously attached person is going to be suffering. They're going to be miserable. They're going to be worried. They're going to be blaming themselves, running through 20 different scenarios of how they could have done things differently, 20 different scenarios of how things are going to fall apart. The person's going to abandon them, leave them. Out of kindness and mercy, the person asking for a break can at least help ease the mind of the anxiously attached person and check in. Even if after an hour you're not ready to talk, that's fine, but at least check in and tune in. Hey, you know what? I'm still not ready to talk, but can we talk? Let's try again in an hour. But I just want to let you know that I do want to talk. I'm just not ready to talk right now. If I talk right now, I'm going to say something I regret, and I need more time to just gather my thoughts. So that's an example of checking in. It's the kind thing to do. Another aspect I wanted to call out in this dynamic that's playing out is what you, the caller, are doing to contribute to this dynamic. At face value, it may seem that the only problem person in this scenario is your partner who's shutting down. However, I encourage you to take accountability for how you are contributing to it, meaning how you are tolerating it. There's something called positive reinforcement that happens within relationship dynamics, where every person in the dynamic, if it's a family dynamic or just with a couple, just the two people, every person is positively reinforcing. Positive meaning they are perpetuating it. They are contributing to it. So if you look at how you are positively reinforcing this behavior in your partner, it could be you tolerating it. It could be the empty threats that you've made. It could be you believing the hype, believing the gaslighting, believing the excuses that maybe you are to blame, that maybe you are too much, that you are too much of a burden, you're too clingy, you're too needy. Whatever the hype is, whatever the narrative is of how you're being labeled, somehow you're accepting it, putting up with it. And is that fair to you? I really want to stress here once again that when it comes to couples relationships, it sounds cliche, but you need two people to make the relationship work. People contact me through DMs or emails or private messages and say, hey, I have done everything that you've said in your videos. I've tried all the tips, I've done the steps, and my partner is not changing. The relationship is not changing. What do I do? And the only answer I have at that point is, you've done everything that you can do. It takes two people to make a relationship work. If your partner is aware of how much suffering you are going through, how you're being affected, how you want to change things, have you suggested, hey, here's a video that I came across that is useful or applies to us. What do you think? Hey, here's a book that I came across. Would you mind reading it? I think it could help us. Hey, I'm really suffering. I'm really being affected in this relationship. What can we do to change it? Are you willing to try couples therapy? If after all of that, your partner is still not changing, and I get it, avoidant people have their share of trauma as well. They didn't just randomly decide to make your life miserable and hurt your feelings. They're struggling with their own set of limitations. But at some point, every adult becomes accountable for overcoming the challenges of their childhood, for showing up in a relationship in a healthy way. And if you're at the point where you've tried everything and communicated everything to your partner and they're still not changing, then you just become part of the problem. It may sound like I'm telling everyone to just break up with your partner if they're not changing and not listening to you, but that's not actually what I'm saying. What I'm saying is to approach the problem in a different way. Most anxiously attached people will approach the problem with the idea of, I am to blame. There's just something I'm not doing. There's something I said to chase them into the cave, something I said to make them shut down, something I'm doing to not have them talk to me again. I'm to blame. I'm to blame. And I'm encouraging you to give that accountability back, to stop at that 50% line and say, okay, I'm showing up here. Please meet me halfway. If you are in a relationship with a person who shuts down, has no signs of changing, and is not going to change, at that point you have a decision to make. Relationships get very complicated. Start adding children, start adding financial enmeshment. Breaking up is not always an easy thing to do. It's never an easy thing to do. But add complications of children and finances and family dynamics, extended family dynamics, and now you have a really complicated decision on your hands. But at that point, if your partner is not changing, you need to make the decision. Can you live with this? And that is something that only you can decide. But at least go into that decision with the idea of, can I live with things the way they are and finding a way to survive if you can't break up with that person? And start to carve out a life for yourself of exploring your identity, finding your sense of self, doing personal work, personal growth, working on your own trauma. Because if at this point in time you find that you cannot break up with that person, and there are many reasons why many people can't, then find a way to work on yourself. Find a way to build your relationship with your children if you have children. But stop taking all of the blame on your shoulders. To the person who asked the question, I understand that this is a very complicated decision, and I'm sure you feel that your partner is wounded. A lot of times, anxiously attached people get attracted to wounded birds, wounded puppies, so to speak, people who need to be saved, which sounds noble at face value, but at what cost to you? It's understandable to me that you would have empathy and compassion and patience for your partner, but again, at what cost to you? Can you love them and support them and empathize with them separate from being in a relationship with them? Generally, I find that people who are anxiously attached don't actually believe that they can get into a better relationship. They believe that this may be the best thing I can ever do. Who's going to put up with me being so clingy and needy? Who's going to put up with me being so damaged? And this is where there's great opportunity for you to do explorations of self, to understand that you are not the problem, and to figure out where to go from here. It may involve your partner and it may not involve your partner, but you need to decide what you can live with and what you can't. Start to accept your partner for who he really is. Sure, he might be able to change, but up until this point, he's not. And that positive reinforcement, the dance that you two do, it's just reinforcing this dynamic that plays out between you two. You asked if there's anything that you can do to convince him to change, essentially, is how I took it. And that's not something that you can do. It's only something that will come from him. I don't know him. I can't tell you what will compel him to change. But I do know that people themselves, every person needs to recognize that there's a problem, a big enough problem to change. Right now, there's a problem to him, I'm sure, but it's not big enough for him to change. If people don't recognize that there's a problem, a big enough problem, they will not shift. So to the person who asked this question, thank you very much for sharing your struggles and your frustrations, and I wish you the best in your decisions moving forward.
My boyfriend and I have been dating for about a year, and early on in the relationship, I communicated to him that I wanted to be married soon, but this has been a source of arguments for us for the past few months. And the timelines that we had agreed on to get married and move in together have been pushed twice already. And recently he shared with me that it saddens him that my timeline or my need to get married and be settled is greater than my love for him, and it makes him feel like he's replaceable. How can I communicate to him that I love him, but my needs are separate non-negotiables and they do not define our relationship?
Thank you very much for this question. I can sense the frustration in your voice, especially about the fact that it sounds like you two had agreed to certain timelines, but those timelines have been pushed. What this comes down to is a relationship vision. Do you two share similar visions for your relationship? You have some very strong desires to be on a specific timeline, and they could be well-founded. Perhaps you are thinking about having children and you want to get started sooner rather than later. I don't know what your motivations are for getting married, but after a year, I would think that even if he's not ready to tie the knot now, he would at least be giving a different response than he's giving, meaning a response such as, yeah, I'm totally in this. Can we just do it in 6 months versus next month? Let's set a date for a year from now. I'm totally into it. I'm not hearing that kind of vibe from him based on your message, which makes me think that when he agreed to those timelines before about, yeah, let's totally get married, I don't know that he was so self-aware of how he actually felt. Either that or he was lying. But let's go with the former and say that he just wasn't aware of how commitment phobic he is. There was one part of your question that was interesting to me. I'll call it a tactic. People argue in obviously various ways. And one of the tactics that I hear a lot is this line of, if you loved me, you would do this. You had mentioned in your message that he said to you that it saddens him that your need to get married is greater than your love for him, which I'm sorry, but that's just a little dramatic to me. When it comes to arguments and debates and positions that people are posturing, you can always tell a weak argument, so to speak, when you can just flip it on the person. For example, you, the caller, could easily say to your boyfriend, wow, it saddens me so much that your not wanting to get married is greater than your love for me. It saddens me that you not doing what I want you to do, is greater than your love for me. It's such a weak argument when people say, if you love me, you would do this. You can flip that on any situation. Well, if you loved me, you would do this. I would rather hear something real from him, such as why he actually is dragging his feet on getting married, why he actually has commitment issues with you. Maybe it's about you. Maybe it's something about the dynamic. Maybe it's a fear of what happens if he actually allows himself to get attached to you. Maybe there's some fear of getting deeply enmeshed with you emotionally that scares him. Perhaps fears of abandonment or rejection. Perhaps there's something about marriage itself. I know many people, I've talked to couples where once they got married, the person got weird. Interesting things happen when people dive into deeper levels of commitment, because in taking the step of, let's say, marriage, people are now really signing on that dotted line. They're really putting their heart in the hands of another person. And people get weird when this happens. Sometimes they'll find other ways to pull back. They'll start to pull away. They'll start to have affairs. They'll just start doing all sorts of nonsense because they are now becoming attached to a person. And for people with attachment issues, feeling yourself become attached to someone can be the scariest thing in the world, and enter now creative ways of self-sabotaging, or abandoning the relationship because it's just too much to be attached. So I'm not saying that your boyfriend is cold and heartless and just a commitment phobe. I'm sure there are many reasons that he is hesitant to get married, but here's the deal. This is a huge value to you. This is a huge part of your relationship vision, is to get married. You communicated that early on. He knew that early on. And if he started to have issues with it, it should have been communicated back to you. But now here we are, a year later. You've invested a year into him. You've invested all this time. Now what do you do? Similar to the last caller, you are at a crossroads where you need to assess what you can live with and what you can't. Because let's be honest, there is no guarantee that your boyfriend is going to be ready to tie the knot in a year, or 3 years, 5 years. How long can this go on? Are you willing to take that risk? Are you willing to let it ride, as they say? How are you going to feel if another year goes by and he is still dragging his feet? If you are looking to bear children soon, this could be a huge factor. Every year that goes by is another year that you could be raising children. Again, I don't know what your reason is for wanting to get married soon, but for many women, it's having children. So there are certain things that are impossible to predict, such as, will this boyfriend be willing to get married in a year? Is he going to move from being so on the fence to just total full conviction in a year or even in 6 months? Is that even realistic? I don't know. So now it becomes, what can you live with and what can't you? You need to decide if you are willing to take this risk and stay in this relationship. Because when he says he's replaceable, yeah, he is. That's the nature of relationships and the nature of dating. You are replaceable. Or for you, the caller, one of your requirements for finding a partner is they need to be willing to marry you in a certain amount of time. This is a very big need, a big value for you, a big priority for you, a pretty big box to check. And he's not checking that box. Going back to what I said to the other caller in the previous question, you're dealing with a person who has free will choice. I doubt there is anything you could say to him that you haven't already said. There's nothing I can say to you that will shed light on the situation for him. Perhaps his commitment issues are related to his own trauma to some degree, like I mentioned. But that's neither here nor there, because what the end result is today, he is not ready to marry you after a year plus of being together. Are you willing to risk another year and him being in the exact same position? That's a big risk if you're wanting to have children soon. When it comes to values and what you find important in a partner, someone who is capable of committing to you and fully on board committing to you is a huge priority and a huge concern. Because let's say that tomorrow he turns around and says, all right, I can tell you're serious about this. Let's just get married. What are the chances that tomorrow, if he has that conversation with you, that he has 100% genuinely crossed over into commitment land and he is, all in? I doubt it. There's going to be a certain percentage of him, I don't know what the percentage is, but at least a certain percentage of him that is not ready to get married, but he's going to get married because you really want him to. That's a very dangerous place to start a marriage on, because that little hesitation can easily grow into resentment. There's so much resentment that is brewing and getting seeded here for your future relationship. Resentment from your side for having to wait. If you wait longer and 1, 2, 3 years go by and you're still not married, and then he eventually marries you, that's going to be a little bit of resentment that you're bringing into the relationship. If he decides to marry you before he's ready, that's going to be resentment on his side that's going to build unless it's addressed between you two. Marriage is tough enough without getting off on the wrong foot. I encourage you to get very clear on why you want to get married. Like I said, if it's because of childbearing years, great. Totally legit reason for wanting to get married. But if this is as big a value of you as getting married, if it is as big a value to you as it is, then you have to stick by those values. Maybe he's not the right guy for you. I don't know. But what I do know is that going into a marriage with this much wishy-washiness is not a great recipe for a long-term commitment. Forcing someone's hand into commitment or marriage is not a great play to start out your marriage. Instead of talking about when you're getting married, I would encourage the both of you to start having conversations about why there is resistance. Something that goes deeper than, if you loved me, you'd understand. If you loved me, you do this. I'm pained that your love is not strong enough than your desire to get married. Go deeper than that. What is actually at the root of his resistance to getting married? Then you'll be able to have a real conversation and have more information on whether or not you two are good partners, on whether or not you two can really make it in a marriage. To the person who asked this question, thank you so much for sharing this part of your life, and I wish you the best in these conversations with your boyfriend, and I hope you get the answers that you're seeking.
Hi, Kim. I was wondering if you would speak a little bit on having a martyr complex. I've really started recently thinking about this within myself. I notice I tend to put myself in really uncomfortable positions and really maybe do the dirty work of, the things that no one else wants to do around me, whether that's at work or even within my friend group. And I think it gives me value. I'm not sure why I do this, but eventually I end up resenting other people for not doing the things that I do, not doing the dirty work, not doing the tasks that other people don't want to. And so it doesn't really feel very healthy. So yeah, if you have any thoughts on that in general or with specifics to my situation, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to the person who submitted this question. This is an interesting spin on people-pleasing, where, yes, there's the people-pleasing dynamic going on, but you specifically mention martyrdom, falling on the sword, doing things that nobody wants to do, as you put it. And let's first address the situation of things that no one wants to do. There are for sure going to be things in life that just suck. Things that you don't want to do, I don't want to do, and as you put it, nobody wants to do. And sometimes life is such that they have to be done, these things, and it's going to be a miserable experience doing them, and such is life. Welcome to adulthood. So this idea that people shouldn't be burdened with things that are despicable and miserable is ridiculous. All adults should expect, especially parents, you know that you're going to be doing a lot of things, especially when the kids are younger, that you don't necessarily want to be doing. The grunt work, the dirty work. But you do these things because it's the right thing to do. So I just want to start off the conversation by saying that, hey, all this dirty work that you're referring to, we all have it, all adults have it, and adults should expect to do it. And this idea that adults shouldn't be burdened with doing dirty work here and there is a little bit of fantasy land. Now the question becomes, are you doing more than your fair share of the dirty work? And one man's trash is another man's treasure. So what you consider to be dirty work, does everyone else agree that that's dirty work? What you consider to be martyrdom, would everyone else agree that you are martyring yourself? But let's pretend that we're all on the same page and that the things that you're agreeing to do and the things that you're volunteering for and just taking on your plate are objectively miserable things to do. Let's just say we all agree that yes. Okay, now what? It sounds to me that you act based on how you perceive yourself as valuable, which everyone does. We learn from a very early age what makes us valuable to our family, to our parents, to our siblings. How am I valuable in this family? How am I important in this family? For people pleasers, a lot of times they will conclude that I am valuable because I did my homework, because I cleaned the house, because I kept my mouth shut, because I didn't complain. Children develop this math, these calculations in their head about what makes them valuable. Sometimes it's based on irrational logic. Many times it's based on irrational logic. But now take that irrational logic into adulthood, and now you have an adult who feels their value is falling on the sword, doing the dirty work, being the martyr. And your value exponentially increases the more miserable the work you do. So no pain, no gain. Great. More pain, more gain. The first question I want to ask you is, who is asking you to be this martyr? It's possible that people are asking you to do the dirty work, that whenever a dirty work task comes up, they say, hey, let's go to this person over here, kind of like Cinderella. We're going to saddle her with all of the really undesirable tasks. So it's possible that people are expecting you to do all these things. So for anyone out there, for any listener out there who finds themselves in a similar position of being the martyr, first of all, ask yourself, are people expecting you to do this? Are people asking you to do this? Or are you volunteering? I want you to start to recognize your agency, your accountability, your empowerment, your ability to have a choice in the matter, that you have a choice in the matter and you're acting on that choice, because the original question comes through in a way that you have no choice, but you do have a choice, and to really embrace that aspect of your agency. The way you pose the question tells me how you value martyrdom. However, you can't assume that everyone else is using the same scale. For example, in your mind, if you take on dirty tasks number 1 or dirty tasks 1 through 5, in your mind, you're saying, wow, I took on the worst tasks possible, and that is going to exponentially increase my worth to others. So the reason you would go for the martyrdom task, go for not just the menial tasks, but you're going to go for like the dirty, horrible, worst tasks, because in return, you're going to get an exponential return of validation and admiration and love. So the math that you're using of, if I go and tackle just the worst possible thing on this list and take that off the plate for this person, then they are going to exponentially love me even more. That math may be really faulty. Because now you're looking around and saying, wow, everybody, look at me taking the worst tasks on the list. I should be set. I should be loved forever. People will love and admire me even more. But you're not getting that kind of adulation. You're not getting a parade down Main Street. So now you're thinking, hey, wait a minute, I'm being a martyr. Where's all the adulation? You know, the martyr complex can also be seen as a victim complex, where people who've experienced some sort of trauma in their childhood, this may be neglect, this could be abandonment, abuse. Martyrdom and a martyr complex can often be just a coping mechanism to help deal with that emotional pain, where you perceive yourself as this worthless person who was abandoned or rejected or neglected. So you might as well just do the worst tasks on the list. You might as well pick out the most suffering. You might as well create the most suffering you can because that is all that you deserve. Why would you expect more for yourself if you're not experiencing good things in your childhood? People with low self-esteem typically don't feel like they deserve happiness or success because they, for one, haven't pursued it. Number two, they haven't been encouraged or had people believe in them that they can. And so they're more comfortable hanging out with the bottom dwellers. They're more comfortable just being in a martyr role, being miserable, inviting suffering into their lives because that's the vibe, that's the frequency that they operate at. If you take people-pleasing and the ideas behind basic people-pleasing, like, oh, if I do something for this person, then they will love me, maybe even love me more. And then you put the gas on it and say, oh, well, if that works, then if I do people-pleasing more, if I become more of a martyr, if my people-pleasing involves more arduous and miserable tasks, then for sure, other people will love me and value me even more. So again, we're getting into the irrational math, the irrational logic of the child brain. So where do you go from here? The first step is self-awareness. Like I said, understanding the root causes of where this martyr complex came from, where keeping yourself aligned with misery, keeping yourself aligned with suffering. Perish the thought that you should move over into happiness and positivity. No, you're more comfortable with suffering and misery, doing the dirty work that no one else wants to do. Understanding where this came from, understanding your agency, that it was a choice, understanding basically the pain of your childhood and what could have created the scenario that keeps you aligned with negative experiences. Why you being more comfortable in the negative suffering space is more familiar to you. And in that familiarity is structure, it's predictability. Because moving out of the misery space into the positive, happy vibe space is a little foreign to you at this point. So what goes along with existing in the misery space? Well, people who gravitate toward the martyr complex, they typically hold negative beliefs about themselves. They're unworthy, they must suffer. I need to suffer in order to be loved. I need to suffer in order to love others. Love is never easy. Being valued is never easy. I must suffer in order to be valued. Now, when I say this out loud, obviously you can hear the irrational logic, and what would replace that logic? If we get back into the tenets of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, everything starts with your thoughts. So starting to move out of the martyr complex starts to really challenge your thoughts. When you find yourself in this space of, okay, if I do this miserable task for this person, they're going to love me and value me more. Challenging that when the thought comes up. This will inevitably lead to healthier boundaries, or at least recognizing the boundaries that you want to draw. Maybe you won't have the courage to draw those boundaries just yet, but at least having the awareness of what healthy boundaries might look like is a great start. Learning to say no in a polite way. You can always say no in a polite way. You can always say that you are unable to do something, it's regrettable, you wish you could do it, but you can't. There are ways of learning to say no. And if you don't know, you can Google it. There are so many resources online. YouTube videos, free documents on Google, even online courses that you can take for setting boundaries, learning to say no. The resources are there and they are very accessible and affordable. The martyr complex also involves learning how to take care of yourself, because if you don't believe that others care about you because they're just wanting to use you to take care of the dirty work, you're certainly not going to take care of yourself. What would it mean to actually take care of yourself? Whether it's exercise, relaxation, or doing hobbies, doing just things that you like just because you like them. To sum it all up, starting to move away from the martyr complex is similar to moving away from imbalanced people-pleasing, which is to first be aware of what your thought patterns are, the irrational logic, the bad math that you have about, oh, if I do this and if I'm miserable, others will love me more. Understanding that you have kept yourself aligned with that negative space because it's been more comfortable. You're more comfortable in pain than you are in happiness. Pain and sorrow is familiar. It's comforting. Happiness and joy are scary, unpredictable, fleeting, perhaps. Learning to challenge the thoughts that keep you in negative beliefs about yourself, about others. Do you really believe that your friends are that superficial and that shallow that if you don't take on all the dirty work and they actually have to take their fair share of dirty work, that they're going to dislike you? Your friends are that shallow? You've surrounded yourself with people who have no integrity. You've surrounded yourself with people who don't actually love you. It's interesting to look at the premise, the unstated premise of what you're asking. The unstated premise of people who have the martyr complex, the people who do imbalanced amounts of people-pleasing. The unstated premise is that others don't really love you, that others don't care about you if you're suffering. Ask yourself, if my friends or family knew that I suffered this much, would they care? Would they want to do something about it? If you feel that they would, why not tell them? Why not draw a boundary here and there? Why not give them the opportunity to demonstrate and prove that they love you? And that's the scary thing for people pleasing, is actually getting in the lab, trying out boundaries, trying out saying no, and waiting and seeing what happens. But it is a necessary step to actually set people up for success, to give people the chance to love you. Because until you do that final step, this is all just theory. It's all theoretical that people love you. So put your friends to the test. You mentioned another result of the martyr complex and intense people-pleasing, and that is the resentment that forms. And that is resentment that you, not them, but you are inviting into the relationship. And in that way, people-pleasing and the martyr complex is just another form of manipulation. And that sounds a little harsh, but when you look at what you do and why and the results you're trying to get, ultimately it's manipulating others, not believing that others really love you. To the person who asked this question, thank you very much for opening up about the martyr complex. This is something that many people can relate to. And I wish you the best in challenging your math of the past, challenging those negative thoughts, getting aligned with happiness and joy, moving away from the comfort of misery, and seeing what life is like on the other side. Thank you very much for your question. Thank you very much for listening to another episode of Engineering Love. And if you would like to work with me in an affordable way, come join my brand new virtual workshop community. With your monthly membership access, you will get 2 live virtual workshops talking about things such as the topics today: attachment theory, resentment, self-esteem, people-pleasing, all of it. And not only get supported by me, but get supported by members in a private community setting, away from the haters of social media. I also have daily Q&A, a question of the day that I answer every weekday, as well as a weekly journal prompt, which will give you reflections to think about for people who want to go deeper in the work. I'm trying to focus on more affordable options for people, such as social media and the podcast, and now the membership community that gives you options for wanting to do deeper work on your own. And if you liked this podcast and liked this episode, please like, subscribe, share with a friend who you think can relate to some of the questions that were asked. And before I leave today, I wanted to share a quote with you, this time from Fred Rogers, who said, "Love and trust in the space between what's said and what's heard can make all the difference in this world. And it is so true, because what people say and how we interpret it is everything. It creates our perspectives. It creates the basis for cognitive behavioral therapy, where you take your perspectives, what you're hearing, so to speak, and reframing it to automatically create different feelings and different behaviors. Thank you very much for listening, and I will see you again next week.